And good morning to everyone. Welcome to all of you who have registered to attend our Middle East Peace Now September Forum. I am Janet Tullen, President of Middle East Peace Now. We would like to thank our sponsors for this event. Our co-sponsors, Northfielders for Justice in Palestine, Israel, and Women Against Military Madness. We greatly appreciate these organizations and others in their support of MEPN monthly forums. Please consider supporting them by attending their events as well. And before I introduce our speaker, Ruby Joy, fellow board member, will share a few housekeeping items about the webinar. Ruby Joy, it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm just going to go over some housekeeping rules. Everyone will be muted for the duration of the event, but please submit your questions to using the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we will be monitoring your questions as they come in. And please feel free to use the chat feature for any administrative or health questions, and we'll do our best to assist you. In the chat and Q&A, we expect all to be respectful, and we reserve the right to remove anyone who is causing harm. And if Zoom is not working out, please shoot us an email at mepn@mepn.org, and we'll do our best to help. We're currently recording this forum today, and it will be on our YouTube channel and posted to Facebook later in this week. And let's see, I think that covers everything. Send it back to you.
Okay, thank you. And now to introduce our speaker, Mitchell Plitnick. Mitchell Plitnick is the president of ReThinking Foreign Policy and a frequent writer on the Middle East and U.S. foreign policy, and that includes Mondo Weiss. He is the former vice president at the Foundation for Middle East Peace, director of the U.S. Office of B'Tselem, and co-director of Jewish Voice for Peace, the co-author of his book, Except for Palestine. Mitchell lives in Maryland. Actually, you live in New York now, right?
No, I live in Maryland.
Oh, you are in Maryland. Okay, Mitchell, please welcome to our forum. Mitchell?
Thanks, Janet, and thanks to MEPN and all your co-sponsors for having me. Pleasure to be here today. Just a little bit about who I am, just so you know who you're hearing from and what what might be informing some of my points of view. I am, as I said, as we heard just a minute ago, I'm from New York City originally. I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish environment. Obviously, I am no longer an Orthodox Jew, because if I was, I couldn't be doing this today, since today is Rosh Hashanah. So I'm glad, and I wish a Shana Tova to anyone out there who does observe Rosh Hashanah. My journey was a very long one, from a very how should one say, not just pro-Israel, but very much supportive of the settlements and that whole movement. That sort of environment is what I grew up in. And it was through study and just trying to really learn the facts that I came to a very different point of view. My academic background includes graduating with honors in Middle Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley and a master's degree in public policy. I am the co-author with Mark Lamont Hill of the book Except for Palestine, Limits of Progressive Politics. And that is kind of the, sort of, in a sense, the takeoff of the article that sort of sparked this event today. Mark and I wrote this book really focusing on primarily the Democratic Party. So when we talk about progressive politics there, we're not talking about what many people consider progressive, which is sort of left-wing and sort of very forward-thinking, rather what might be called progressive in Congress, which is a very different thing. So we focused on the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party, in my view, has been very much part of the problem. In a very different way, perhaps, from the Republican Party, at least these days, although, in past years, they were more similar, I think. But it's also the place that can be moved. And I think that's important, because when, today I'll be talking about some of the things that have developed this year that open up opportunities for movement and change. I'm going to try to limit my remarks as much as possible because I'm really more interested in hearing the questions that you in the audience might have and addressing those. I just think that's more interesting than hearing me drone on. But just to sort of frame things, as you have probably seen, the title of this talk is the 2023 a turning point in U.S. policy towards Israel-Palestine. And what might that mean? Well, when we think of change, I think those of us who are in the whatever phrase you might use, the Palestinian solidarity camp, pro-Palestinian camp, whatever words we might use, I think when we think of change, we get excited because the status quo is so horrible. It's important, I think, when we when we look at this, to keep in mind the change isn't always for the better. Even in this regard, where we sometimes think things can't get any worse. We this week saw the 30th anniversary of the signing of the White House, the famous White House lawn handshake between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, which everyone, well, should not say everyone, but so many people thought was a major change that meant things were finally going to get better and things were going to kill. And as we know, 30 years later, things are worse. And Oslo was a big part of the reason. So, change is not necessarily for the better. And when we look at, what's changing, I think the one place to start also is what's not changing. So one of the things that isn't changing right now is the situation, the political situation for the Palestinians. Sorry, the cat is kind of disturbing the camera here, sorry. The political situation for Palestinians remains largely the same, with the Palestinian Authority led by the Fatah Party leading in the West Bank, Hamas in Gaza. That split. There has been some talk and then some sense of hope that there might be some reconciliation, but at least for now, that is not happening. The movement towards that has been kind of more of the same, and it's sort of abortive, halting first steps. So that is still a problem. At the same time, in Palestine, we've seen the development of new armed groups that approach things a bit differently. They're local to various different parts of the West Bank and sort of defend those parts. And most of their activities are around defending refugee camps and Palestinian villages from Israeli invasions. So it's kind of a different approach. It's become very, very popular, but it's still not in any way a significant problem for the Israeli military regime. So things are largely the same there. Things are also largely the same in Washington. And I'm going to get into that a little more depth in just a bit. But the conditions in Washington sort of stand out because the conditions among the American people are changing, and yet it seems to have no effect, particularly on Capitol Hill, but also in the halls of the Biden administration. So what changes am I referring to? Well, in Israel, I think we've all seen, the headlines have reflected this sort of what we are yet again calling the most right-wing government in Israel's history. We say this with every single election, and I think that's sometimes the point that's missed, particularly in the American mainstream media. This is the culmination, and it may not be the end, but this is where Israel has been going since the late 70s. The Israeli right has been resurgent. It has moved through a number of different phases, from being a sort of surprise winner in the late 70s elections to really getting its hooks into Israel's military, which it typically had not done up until the past decade or so, and the growth and power of the settlement movement, with the Israeli right really taking over the Israeli body politic. One of the things that I think is often omitted when people talk about Israel and its politics is they look to the opposition. The opposition is where there's going to be hope. Well, it's true there are some differences between the opposition and the current government, but the opposition is largely the Israeli right as well. It's just a different kind of Israeli right. The leaders of the Israeli opposition be it Benny Gantz, be it Gideon Sar, who these are people who are very clearly right-wing figures. Yair Lapid is someone you would call maybe right of center, but this is a man who kicked off his election campaign some years back in a settlement. So he is not what anyone would call a left-winger. That's what we have now in Israel. And this has caused a backlash as they have tried to consolidate the power of the right and eliminate the democratic structures that exist for Jewish Israelis. And of course, this is highlighted, and I think it started to bring a little bit to more awareness in the United States, the fact that those democratic structures, though real, exist only for Israeli Jews. They do not exist in anything like the same measure for Palestinian citizens of Israel. And the Palestinians who live under Israeli domination in the West Bank and Gaza have no rights at all. And live lives in terms of the law that are completely capricious. The Israeli right doesn't like the fact that occasionally the courts might decide certain cases in their favor. It doesn't happen very often, but even that is too much for them. And that really is a lot of what sparks what's happening now. And it means that the right has tried to move to diminish those democratic structures. And that's caused a backlash in Israel among the mainstream of Israelis. And the positive part of that is that for many of those people, as hard as they've tried to maintain the distinction between their protest and the denial of Palestinian rights, it's proven very difficult. That issue keeps coming up, and there are some Israelis who are Israeli Jews who are going out there and reminding them that these two things are intimately connected. They're essentially one and the same. That's part of it, but part of it is also just it's inescapable. These people who they are fighting are the settlers. So there's no way to truly separate the two issues: the loss or attacks on democracy for Jews and the ongoing denial of Palestinian rights. In the United States, there's also been a pretty dramatic shift in public opinion. I would argue that it comes from the same cause, that Americans are seeing Israel moving farther to the right and to a more authoritarian form of government and just form of living, really, and are not comfortable with it. Now, who would not be comfortable with it? Well, Republicans are perfectly comfortable with that. They have no problem with it. Democrats are considerably less comfortable with where Israel has gone, so much so that in March, for the first time, we saw a poll from the Pew Research Center that showed that 64% of Democrats were more sympathetic to the Palestinians than to the Israeli government. And I think the way it was phrased is important, because what they were asking was not, do you care about Israelis, which has been the way polls have often been framed in the past. And for many people, there's still the issue, and not without merit, of anti-Semitism and the question of, is a Jewish state the solution to that? I, as a Jew, do not believe that's the right answer. But but as a Jew, I also am very keenly aware of the existence of anti-Semitism and the fact that it's been rising in the West these past few years. So I understand why people get concerned about that. So framing it as the Israeli government, do you have sympathy for the Israeli government or for the Palestinians, reflects something about the mood of Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents. Independents are pretty much evenly split on that question. Republicans overwhelmingly back the Israeli government. The same poll did not show a whole lot of sympathy for the Palestinian Authority. So I think that's where we see the distinction. But this has never been a political reality in the United States before. All of a sudden now we're seeing popular feeling in a major party that truly sympathizes with the plight of the Palestinians. And I think that is one of the things that really sparked me to say this year is a turning point. We're not seeing a lot of effects of that in terms of U.S. policy or actions. But I do believe in 10 years, we're going to look back at 2023 and see this is where it started to turn around. The other place where we're seeing some change happening is in the international arena. And that is changing on many levels. Obviously, there are very dramatic events going on, the war in Ukraine and other issues, the resurgence of NATO, the involvement of China in the Middle East, I think potentially can change the playing field that we're seeing in the region. The move for many countries towards a multipolar world, and when I say that move, these are countries that traditionally align with the United States. We're seeing it, for example, with Saudi Arabia in a very big way. Their foreign policy is largely centered on reducing their dependence on the United States, even as they're trying to get more out of the United States. And there's a sort of push and pull happening between the US and Saudi Arabia that revolves around that, and where Saudi Arabia is trying to diversify its foreign connections and the greater powers that it considers close allies, whereas the United States is trying very hard to pull Saudi Arabia back into its own orbit, with, I would say, very limited success. Now, I don't want to overstate the importance of China being involved in the region. China did come in at the end of years of negotiation and broker a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran to reestablish relations. That can seem more dramatic than it is because there's been so much talk about that breach. But in fact, those relations had only been split for 7 years. It isn't a long. It hasn't been many years that's been going on. Still, it was significant, but China's role was limited. Most of the real work in mediating and putting together that agreement was done by Iraq, not by China. China came in at the end, bringing its gravitas on the world stage to sort of seal the deal. China has also been more public about supporting the Palestinians. In recent months, there was Mahmoud Abbas went to Beijing and had a meeting, and a few trade deals were signed. Nothing that's groundbreaking or earth-shattering. And I think, we have to be careful not to look to China for too much. China is not about to get involved in the Israel-Palestine quagmire, because it is a quagmire, and China just is very conservative about how deeply involved in those sorts of things it gets, and has probably seen what happens with the United States when it gets too involved in the day-to-day issues of other countries, particularly Israel and Palestine. But China is trying to be a player in the region, and that causes a reaction in Washington. For all that Joe Biden likes to say we're not trying to start a new Cold War, our foreign policy, however you want to label it, has largely been centered around countering, containing, and competing in the most aggressive manner with China. Chinese the view from the Biden administration has been largely zero-sum. They consider it a negative when China makes any gains at all, whether or not they really compromise American interests, and of course many of them do. But there is a framing there that matters and could have a ripple effect in the future in the Middle East and in Israel-Palestine. What that might be, it's hard to say, but China is a partner to the Palestinians. China is also a country that Israel has been doing business with for a very long time and very much wants to maintain and enhance that relationship. In fact, it's been a point of friction long before the Biden administration with Washington, that Israel has at times sold weapons to China that the United States was not happy about. They've sold technology. They've worked on some joint projects. There have been issues in Washington over the Israel-China relationship. So this is something that can grow into something in the coming years. I think it will have an effect. I can't say exactly what, but again, that's another reason that I think 2023 is going to be looked back at in the future as a year that things changed. That being said, we recently saw Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House, leading a delegation to Israel that was bought and paid for by AIPAC. It was the typical, Israel is beautiful. They were sending back videos talking about how wonderful Israel is and how beautiful. Not a mention of the Palestinians. They occasionally said, "Well, we discussed X, Y, or Z about the occupation." When asked directly, they said, "Well, we mentioned this to our Israeli partners." I mean, it was obviously an Israeli promotion tour, and AIPAC then went ahead and brought a delegation of from the Congressional Black Caucus just a week or so later. So they're doing a real full court press on this, and unfortunately, the mainstream of the Democratic Party is very much playing along with it. In my view, that's a political miscalculation, and I can talk more about that in the Q&A, and I'll get also into it when I talk a bit more about the administration in a moment. But that all of that being the case, we still see there's a little bit more debate on Capitol Hill about our policy towards Israel. Yes, a lot of that is headed by people who are considered outside of the mainstream, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders. It's still important, and it still has to be dealt with. It's also important that those people be supported in doing that. All of that stuff matters. And one of the reasons it matters, I think, is some of the things we've seen from, and I'm happy to say this is my senator. I actually get to say something nice about my own senator. Chris Van Hollen has done some, fairly, at least to me, unexpected things on this issue. He's been very vocal, for example, about Israel being ineligible to join the visa waiver program. Before that, he almost single-handedly kept the issue alive of the murder of Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. He kept that issue alive for months when the rest of the Senate and certainly the Biden administration desperately wanted it to go away. He kept it alive so much that it forced the Democratic chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, who is a notorious Israel hawk, absolutely, just down the line pro-AIPAC guy. Even he said that there needs to be a more credible investigation of what happened, and someone needs to be held accountable, and essentially said he didn't believe Israel's version of events. Which, it doesn't sound like much, but for a guy like Menendez, that's remarkable. And I think these are the early signs that Democrats are being forced to at least begin to listen to what their constituents are saying on Palestine. Because the constituents are saying they don't like the policy that exists right now. The administration, by contrast, I think, has been thoroughly tone deaf from day one. The sort of mantras that we've heard from Secretary of State Blinken, from various, one White House aide or State Department spokesperson after another, that we support equal measures of security and prosperity for Israel. I mean, the word soup that means absolutely nothing, while Israel has completely consequence-free been cracking down in ways much more visible on Palestinian human rights that I think most of us find quite appalling. From their invasion of Jenin to the regular pogroms that settlers are launching under the protection of the Israeli Defense Forces, many of these things are not necessarily new, particularly the settler attacks. This has been going on, and soldiers have been running interference or protecting them or even joining in with them. This has been going on for many, many years, but it's now come to light for many more people. This reality is being understood. So I think that is important, and yet somehow this administration thoroughly ignores it. They have done absolutely nothing on some of the most egregious behavior of the Israeli government beyond a few words saying, "Please rein it in. You're making it really hard for us to make a deal with the Saudis for you." That deal, and I think that reflects more than anything else the complete blindness of this administration and the political miscalculations that they're making. The deal proposed is an expansion of the Abraham Accords that would see Israel and Saudi Arabia have normal relations. And the question is, what happens in return? What do particularly the Saudis get for that? Because for Israel, that's enough. That's plenty. That is a huge thing. And for the Saudis have a wish list of many, many things. But when we're looking at it from the perspective of U.S. policy, first of all, on the point of Israel, this deal, if it's going through, and I do not believe it will, I should say that at the outset, I think this is not going to happen, despite the Biden administration's very, very concerted efforts. But if it did, or if it does, the United States would be putting its imprimatur on this blatantly and openly racist and fascist government. Now, many of us might say, well, Israel's always been, certainly when it comes to the Palestinians, racist and fascist. That may be, but this is the first time that everybody knows it and everybody's seeing it. And if this deal should happen, the Biden administration would be saying, yeah, that's perfectly okay. We're still going to promote everything, and we still consider you a democracy, all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. The statement that would make to the world, Israel has, and the U.S. relationship with Israel has in many ways undermined American foreign policy for many, many years in many different ways. But this, I think, would be maybe the worst blow that this issue could deal to American credibility in the world, for whatever that's worth anymore. On the Saudi side, the Saudis are playing, I think, a calculated game right now. They are already getting a lot of the benefits of normalization, so they can basically pick and choose what they want. They already, through CENTCOM and through the United States, they already basically network with Israel on matters of security or defense or military matters in the region. In terms of countering Iran, that tends to be the big policy question for both Israel and Saudi Arabia, and through the United States, they cooperate on that already. That's a big deal. There's long been clandestine business dealings between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Without a doubt, those would increase if relations are normalized, and they'd be obviously less politically risky for Saudi Arabia. But we're not talking about a huge amount of trade here. They are also getting the things that they are asking for. They are already, one of the things they're asking for in order to do this is an upgraded status in terms of the weapons they can buy from the United States, which is a big deal. Should they upgrade those weapons, I think that would severely destabilize the region. But again, they're already doing a lot of business buying American arms, so that's not a huge trade. The other things the Saudis want, one is a defense pact. That essentially means that the U.S. is guaranteeing that in the event of any attack from anyone, whoever it may be, on them, the United States would come to their defense. Even Israel doesn't have that. Although, politically, in practice, there may be something like that de facto. It may happen that way, but there's no actual agreement for the United States. There's no actual physical commitment to doing that. That's not going to happen. There's no way that will go through. But some enhanced status for Saudi Arabia that puts them more under the American protective umbrella than they already are, that could happen. And again, the United States has, for very good reasons, been trying to extricate itself from the Middle East. This would be pulling it way deep back in. That's one thing. And the other thing that Saudi Arabia wants is the ability to enrich uranium by itself on its own soil. That is something they are permitted under the nuclear nonproliferation, tough word, nuclear nonproliferation treaty. they're permitted to develop it themselves. The United States is under no obligation to help them. The United States should not be helping them to do that. I see that as a very, very dangerous idea. It is dangerous that the United States has nuclear weapons. It is dangerous that Israel has nuclear weapons. It would be dangerous if Iran had a nuclear weapon, and it would be exceedingly dangerous if the Saudis had a nuclear weapon. Now, the Saudis, of course, insist that this enrichment program would be strictly for peaceful purposes, and that's why they're allowed to do it under the NPT. As long as it is for peaceful purposes, yes, you can do that. But if you have a domestic enrichment program, that's what brings up all the questions of, are you concealing something? Are you concealing a weapons program? All the questions that get asked about Iran. Even though our own assessments are that Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon for at least 20 years, if they ever were. That point, I think, is the crucial one, and in terms of what the Saudis are asking for normalization from Israel. And again, this is why I do not think it will happen. But the Saudis can afford to wait. That's one of the big differences between them and both Israel and the United States. The ruling family will be in power for the foreseeable future. They don't need to push this process. There's nothing in it for them to take risks for this process to happen now, as opposed to 5 years from now. For the things the things that they want, if they wait, they have a better chance of getting them. In Israel, that is not the case. And in the United States, it's not the case. The Biden administration, for some strange reason, is convinced that if they broker this deal, it will be a huge electoral boon for them. I cannot overstate what a miscalculation I believe that is. I do not believe it will help them in the 2024 election. In fact, it might hurt them. The idea that the pro-Israel political forces here in the United States would look at that deal and suddenly drop all of their concerns about the Democrats and go, to completely abandon the Republican Party and go full tilt for a Biden reelection and as many Democrats as can get into Congress is absurd. And it completely ignores the way this lobby operates. For one thing, they listen to the Netanyahu government, and the Netanyahu government, as we know, is very closely aligned with the Republicans. They're more than happy to reap the benefits of a positive relationship with the Democratic president. But ideologically, they're very close to the Republicans. In practice, they're very close to the Republicans. That's not going to change because Biden brokers this deal. Nor is the fact that most of the elections, whether it's president or the local congressional representative, those candidates, for the most part, to pro-Israel groups are going to look better if they're only looking at the issue of Israel, which AIPAC repeatedly talks about how it is, and that's how it justifies supporting insurrectionists. If they look, if that's their calculus, then the overwhelming majority of Democrats are going to be, even ones that are quote unquote pro-Israel, are not going to be as likable to them as Republicans. So there is very, very little electoral or political benefit to this massive effort that the Biden administration is putting in. It seems that they believe there is, and they are just dead wrong. It's another, I think, example of President Biden basically living in the 70s in many, many ways. And the ways that he has not, even domestically, are largely because he's been pushed there politically by progressive forces. And unfortunately, the push on this issue, as on most foreign policy issues, is just not nearly as strong. So, the fact is that for all that I'm seeing change beginning in 2023, there's absolutely no hint of it in Washington, whether it's in the administration or in Congress. So those things are not changing, and that does. But, and I should really stress this, and I'll close with this and move on to your questions. That doesn't mean that these efforts are useless. The reason I believe that we're going to look back in years ahead and see 2023 as a turning point is because of the efforts of activists who are working in a variety of different ways on Palestine solidarity, on, if you frame it as peace in the Middle East, however it's being framed, the people who are working here to change American policy towards one that promotes a more just and better future in Palestine and even in Israel, those things are having an effect. It takes time. It took time for AIPAC to become the behemoth in Washington that it is. AIPAC really, for its first 25 years of existence, was a lobbying group. It mattered. It wasn't irrelevant, but it was really took about 3 decades before it really became this monster that could really make politicians nervous. And could really bring some serious weight to bear. So, and unfortunately, the other side is way behind on that. But we are starting to see effects. And the Palestine solidarity movements have the advantage of both having the facts on our side and also having humanity on our side, having humanitarianism on our side, having I think we just saw when Mahmoud Abbas made these abhorrent statements about Jews. We saw so many Palestinian activists, intellectuals, prominent artists, people who wrote this letter condemning it, and even people who didn't agree necessarily with the letter. I can think of a few who I have great respect for who would not sign the letter and publicly stated why they would not sign the letter, and I understand their reasons. But even they were not defending Abbas in any way and were very clearly distancing themselves from Abbas's statements. So when we see that and how complete the stance against any sort of bigotry and racism exists in the Palestine solidarity movement, I think that is a massively important piece of what we're doing and why there is a lot of hope and why there will be growing support and why even the small effects that we have now are starting to be visible. So I think those things are important. As much as, it's true that there has been no change really in Washington, I do think we're starting to see signs that change is coming. And it takes, it does take time. It can be frustratingly slow, but it is happening. And so, within the things that I've said that maybe are discouraging, I think it's really important for me to stress that the overall picture is starting to look better. And as I say, I think we will look at 2023 as the year where real change started to take root. And I as much as I don't necessarily think change has to be good, I think given how engaged people are now, especially compared to 30 years ago, when the Oslo Accords and everybody kind of went, okay, this is great, move on to another issue. I think people right now are much more engaged, much more have much more, I don't want to say dedication because I think people were dedicated back then, but are much more skeptical of a positive development, and that's a good thing because I think people will stick with it. So I do think that positive things are on the horizon, but unfortunately not nearly fast enough. And I'll stop there and take your questions.
Thank you, Mitchell. We already have 7 questions. Ruby, do you want to monitor that or do you want me to?
I can read them out here. We've got the first one I see says, we need to establish an organization that can enable a solution completely leaving out the US from the equation. They cannot be part of this process as they are on the side of the oppressor. They must be stripped of their veto vote at the UN, and the UN is illegitimate as it does the US's bidding. This is urgent and it must change immediately. I would like your guest to comment on, as we need solutions, not more talk and more webinars where we keep talking about the same thing over and over again, which I personally find overwhelmingly frustrating.
Well, so let me say a few things about that. First of all, I hear you about the talk in the webinars. I also find it frustrating when people are, you know, talking about I spend most of my time working on various policy changes, working in a number of different ways. Many of, there's many people doing that, the political work, the on the ground work. It's not just about, you know, webinars and social media and things of that nature. So that's one thing. I think the more important, I guess, to me anyway, at least in my mind, part of your question is the international structures that sustain oppression. I think, for me, those are, I don't disagree with anything that you said. The U.S. has been the major obstacle on the question of Palestine pretty much since the end of World War II. And then before that, it was the United Kingdom. So, those outside forces we know are the UN. I think there's a lot in the UN that could be changed into something much more productive. But for now, you're right. It does little outside of humanitarian work, which it does quite well. But that does not, humanitarian work in many ways can be argued to even sustain problems because it only treats the worst symptoms of those problems. So I don't think that's an either or thing. I don't think we don't do the policy work because the structures are bad, and I don't think I don't think we refrain from challenging the structures because we're doing policy work. And I think that's often presented as a choice. I don't think it is. I think, in fact, Palestine, in my mind, one of the reasons I work on Palestine, I am concerned about, as I'm sure you and everyone listening are concerned about many issues. I frequently get asked, well, why are you working on Palestine when climate change is going to kill us all? I mean, you can look at it that way too. One of the reasons I work on Palestine, though, is I actually think that if Palestine is resolved, if Palestinians are free, and in the sort of vision that the Palestine Solidarity Movement is pushing for, which is quite egalitarian, I think. If that happens, I think it's a lever for wider and systemic change. I think it's one of the reasons that many of the powers that be are worried about it and are often inordinately concerned about it. So I think also it's easy to get paralyzed if we say we can't solve this problem without solving global structural problems. I think that there's an extent to which that's true, but I also think that, when one goes to a Palestinian refugee camp or, to the villages in Masafayata, you see this, something has to change before we're even worrying about changing all of these big power structures. That has to be addressed, and it can be without necessarily, it doesn't have to wait for us to change the power structures of the entire world. And then I think that, bringing everything back to, we have to restructure some sort of global United Nations-like institution and create something like that to solve these problems. I think that's paralyzing. And so I think it's important to move forward on the problems that we're dealing with. Again, getting the United States out of it is my goal. I agree the United States is a problem, and I don't really see a way in which the United States is going to play a positive role unless something very radical changes here. That being said, again, that the villagers that I've met in Masafayata and in other places throughout Palestine, those people can be helped without necessarily waiting to get the United States out, because that is a Herculean task. The United States remains the world's lone superpower. We're not moving that behemoth out of Palestine next week, or next year, or next decade. That is much longer term work, and that we should all be engaged in every day. I work on it every day. Many of my colleagues work on it every day. So Yeah, webinars are, I think, important in terms of having these conversations, in terms of educating people, in terms of bringing people out. But there's a lot of other things going on, and they are, as I said before, beginning to work.
Thank you so much, Mitchell. The next one we have is a request to speak more to the political miscalculation supporting APAC-sponsored trips.
So it's not the trips themselves. I mean, APAC knows exactly what it's doing. The political miscalculations I was referring to is from the Biden administration, not from Democrats in general. The mainstream of the Democratic Party, you look at, again, someone like Hakeem Jeffries, I think, is a great example. This is a man who is possibly going to be the next Speaker of the House. Should the Democrats take the House back in 24, he will be the Speaker. He's a smart guy, and he's not an inept politician. He is from New York, which, always, is just one of the places where the pro-Israel forces are the strongest. But he is absolutely locked in to APAC and the lobby. Is that a good idea? I mean, he is less locked in maybe than some of his predecessors. He just endorsed quite vocally and quite clearly, he just endorsed Ilhan Omar, who's pretty much #1 on AIPAC's hit list. He did that. The party has a policy basically of endorsing all incumbents, and while they thought about making exceptions for the squad, they decided not to. But he was quite emphatic about it. So there was a bit of a stance there. Still, you look at what he said when he went to Israel, and it's very clear he was kissing up to pro-Israel forces. His complete ignoring of the Palestinians while he was there. Again, it's clear what's going on there. I think that is a political miscalculation on his part to an extent. Although on the more local level, I think that he is, he's looking at his own reelection. He still has to get reelected every 2 years. So, when he's doing that, I think that's maybe less of a miscalculation on his part. That might make some political sense, although I do think he underestimates what's standing up for not necessarily BDS or anything like that, but for, taking a clearer stance against what the Netanyahu government is doing and how they're behaving, and not, just giving them a free pass. I think he's underestimating how that might play politically, even in his district. But on the broader level, which is really what I was focusing on, and really the presidential race, so the larger issue, which gets into where will AIPAC put its political resources, including money, including ads, including many of its now quite open campaign involvement. So a couple of years ago, AIPAC actually became a PAC. Despite the name, it was a 501c3. It could not engage in political direct political campaigning. So it could not engage in campaign financing. It could not endorse particular candidates. What it did was it gave a report card on people and talked about people's policies. You can do that as a 501c3. You can say, well, this person's policy on Israel is X, Y, and Z. This person, and in terms of Congress, we are the pro-Israel lobby. We can give them A's and B's and C's the same way the NRA does, and AARP and many other lobbying groups. But now they're into campaign financing. That was something they did not want to do for a long time, and now they're doing it. And I think it shows that they're feeling the changing of the tide. Biden's ignoring all of that. So the miscalculation that I'm referring to is Biden seems to think, as I mentioned before, that if he brokers a deal with the Saudis, or if he holds, at least meets with Netanyahu on the sidelines of the General Assembly, or if he, ignores the Palestinians, as he basically has since he got into office, that somehow this is going to change the way AIPAC behaves in the 2024 election. I cannot overstate how wrong that is. It just isn't true. That's not how AIPAC operates. It's not how they've operated for many years. It's certainly not how they're going to operate now. And it's not going to change the way Israel looks at the United States. Israel just came through 4 years of Donald Trump. And what did they get? One can argue, and I think there are people in Israel who are a little more thoughtful and maybe a little less politically minded and more sort of big picture. And I'm not talking about anyone who is sympathetic at all to the Palestinians, just Israeli, mostly in the military leaders, but people who just look at the whole question of Israel and realize that Donald Trump wasn't really that great for them. But what did he do? I mean, he effectively, he moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, which was a huge move that Israel has wanted for decades. He recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He brokered the first deals with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. These were sort of big ticket items, big things that looked great to many Israelis and to many of Israel supporters here in the United States. And even if Biden does get the Saudis, which are, of course, they are the big prize, and that was what Trump could not deliver. But even if he does, it's still just going to be extending Trump's own. Trump was the one who started the process, and then Biden, kind of moved it forward. But there's, so I think there's limited political utility there. There's going to be also, I think, many pro-Israel types who are going to look at how the Biden administration has approached Iran. Now, I am heavily critical of their approach to Iran. I believe they could have reinstated the JCPOA at the beginning of their time in office. And I think they intentionally dragged their feet until it became a much, much harder thing to do, because they didn't want to just reinstate that deal. They wanted to try and get something a little bit different. And now they're going to end up with, even if they do reinstate something, it'll be less than what it was. And therefore less benefit to the U.S. From the hawkish point of view. But even that is routinely blasted by pro-Israel forces, just shredded. Everything, he just got 5 Americans back out of Iran, and they absolutely killed him for it, even though the money that was made available to Iran is only being spent actually by Qatar. And Qatar is making sure that money only gets spent on food and medicine and other humanitarian supplies. None of this was good enough to bring Americans who were imprisoned in Iran home. Even that got him criticized by the right. So, yeah, I don't believe that this is going to have the electoral benefit that Biden seems to think it will. But it's going to have enormous cost in terms of security, because you're going to have, not only will it be the final nail in the hypocrisy coffin for Biden, who said he was going to make MBS a pariah and all this, and now he's fist bumping him and absolutely pumping him up. But it's going to really destabilize the region, because you're going to give Saudi Arabia much greater weapons, even if you don't compromise necessarily on the nuclear issue. There will be a weapons upgrade and a security guarantee upgrade of some kind that is part of this deal. It's going to hurt Biden politically, and it's certainly going to hurt U.S. interests. So I just think it is a horrible miscalculation on Biden's part, that the entire emphasis that he's putting on brokering this deal, I think he's really misguided.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. The next one I have here is a question on what is the Israeli agenda behind its frequent bombing of Syria and Syrian airports? You can speak to that a little.
Yeah, I think this is just more of the sort of low-level war conflict, one would say, that Israel has been waging against Iran and Hezbollah. that is usually what they're targeting. They're not generally targeting Syrian forces, although they're hitting them. I mean, because they're all in the same, obviously in the same place. I think that's what you're seeing there is Israel's attempt to make sure that to ensure that Iran and Hezbollah cannot comfortably establish positions relative to itself in Syria. I think again, this is Hezbollah is probably the group that in terms of security Israel's most worried about, which actually says a lot. I think let's step back and realize that says a lot about how secure Israel actually is. When Hezbollah is really the group that's threatening you, Hezbollah can't threaten Israel. I mean, they can certainly launch missiles and they can do some damage and they can kill people, yes, but there's no threat to Israel's actual existence that Hezbollah can mount anywhere in the foreseeable future, nor can Iran. But that is what that's about. It's a chess game that's been going on for a great many years. And as with everything that involves Israel and anything that they consider security, unfortunately, civilians end up paying the price, and particularly in Syria, civilian infrastructure is what pays a lot of the price. There is an aspect that Israel is pretty comfortable with the fact that the Assad regime is compromised. One would say, obviously it is an unstable. It's still an unstable regime. There's a lot of rebuilding that still has to happen in Syria, and so as long as Assad's control over Syria is that tenuous. I mean, he's essentially won the war, but he's presiding over what is still a divided, conflict-ridden, and largely destroyed country. Israel's happy to see it continue that way, I think, and as it just eliminates the one country on its border whose government could potentially work directly with Iran to, I think in the Israeli mind, launch some attack on that. But that, as unrealistic as that might be, I think that is what it comes back to, is limiting Iranian and Hezbollah's capabilities. Usually those attacks are happening when Israel gets intelligence about some weapon shipment or other that has gone that's coming from Iran to Hezbollah. So for right now, that's where it's going. And I think it's also, we're seeing some tensions playing out on the Israeli-Lebanese border that are sort of also related. I think Israel is just constantly sort of warning, in a sense, with these attacks, Hezbollah, to refrain from any sort of full scale or larger scale attacks on it. Whenever Israel has a sense that something like that might be brewing. So I think that's mostly what you're seeing. It's kind of, I hate to say it, but it's kind of just the way things are now. It's the status quo.
Thank you. We would love to hear more on your thoughts concerning the BDS movement in the US in general.
I think, right now, I think the focus in the big picture on the BDS movement is actually the point. The fact that it gets so much attention, and the fact that that it is being attacked not just politically, but by trying to eliminate essentially free speech and creating a free speech exception on the subject of Israel, I think is huge. I would personally love to see a more organized BDS effort on a global level. It's very the point of it was for the Palestinians to issue a call and have different groups of different types engage with that call as they saw fit, and in ways that supported the very loose framework of the BDS call, but beyond that, to groups should all, take it, in the directions that they felt most effective or comfortable with. I would like to see that graduate into something more organized, but that's a Palestinian call. But right now, it is possibly the most important part of the Palestine solidarity movement. And it has, in many ways, it has, I think, two factors to thank for. One is Israel itself, because Israel has completely gone out of its mind over the BDS movement, and as I say, attacked free speech in order to protect itself from boycotts. The idea that you can't boycott a country. Look, let's say, we back up. Let's say for a minute that everything Israel says is 100% right. Let's say they're completely in the right. Everything they did was totally justified, and everything they're doing is totally justified and fine. And yet people still wanted to boycott the movement. Well, that's their right. People can have their opinion, even if their opinion is wrong. In this case, it's not wrong, but even if it was, that is, people can organize a boycott. And, I think history shows that if you try to organize a boycott, and it's based on lies or based on faulty thinking or a bad idea, it's not going to gain much traction. There's a reason this one has gained traction, because we can all see the dispossession of the Palestinian people and the denial of their rights, and that's why BDS has generated the momentum it has. I would argue that at some point, boycott and divestment is of limited effect in terms of getting Israel to change its policies. At some point, sanctions have to be part of that, and that's the part that is the most difficult. You need a political movement to get governments have to do that, and we're nowhere near there yet, and I'd like to see more focus on that. But one way or another, the BDS movement has been I think the single most important factor in opening the conversation about Palestine and Palestinian rights, and in making people realize that there's a real problem there that's gone on for a long time, and that too many of us are complicit with.
Thank you so much. We're also curious to hear about your opinion on the Palestinian Authority and how Palestinian leadership is imperative to Palestinian future.
So, okay, I will preface this by saying that I am, as an American Jew, always a little reluctant to talk too much about Palestinian politics. Obviously, I have to know about them and be involved to some degree. So I feel a little constrained about that, and conscious of who I am when I'm making these statements. That being said, I hope, really hope that the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza find a way to replace this leadership, because it has served them very, very badly and continues to serve them very, very badly. Most Palestinians I know agree with the assessment, which I agree with as well, that the PA is essentially a subcontractor of the occupation. Its primary purpose is to keep the Palestinians in line, and its primary function is to engage in the security cooperation with Israel. I think I just was watching an interview with Dana El-Kurd, the Palestinian intellectual, and she talks about how Mahmoud Abbas is essentially the United States' guy, and I think that's right. He was promoted by the United States when Arafat was still alive. He was the guy, in fact, that many in the Bush administration wanted to deal with and would not deal with Arafat. So they were using him to go around Arafat. And once he got in, we've seen the United States has not since 2006 has not really done anything to support Palestinian elections. At the same time as then it says, look how the Palestinians don't hold elections. So it's, you're kind of playing both sides there, and it works. I mean, what can I say? I I think the Palestinian Authority has been just a horrible thing for the Palestinian people. And as I say, I can only hope that the Palestinian people find some way to replace that. And if there is some, part of our solidarity work that they call on us to help them do that, I think we should be ready to respond.
Thank you so much. We have a question that says, what advice do you have to Palestinians themselves on the home front, namely the fractured political parties and liberation movements? I'm not sure if home front refers to Palestine or
I think in the context, it sounds like it's referring to Palestine. And I kind of go back to my preface from the last question, which is I'm very reluctant to offer. First of all, I have never lived in the West Bank. I visited, I've been, I know people and this and that. I know something about the politics there. I don't think I'm I don't think I'm intellectually in a position to offer that kind of advice. And B, I don't think this is a place where my identity as an American Jew kind of makes me uncomfortable offering that advice. What I said before, which is that I really have nothing positive to say about the Palestinian Authority, and hope that Palestinians can do something about that. And again, if there's a call for solidarity in a plan to change that politics, I absolutely support it. I do think, I guess I would say that the efforts to try and at least bring Fatah and Hamas together and try and create at least one Palestinian political body again, that is a good idea. Even without a change in leadership, that would still be a step forward. The fracture is just, I mean, if I'm Netanyahu, I'm thanking God every day for that split. It has been an absolute political blessing for Israel's anti-Palestinian agenda. So but beyond that, how you do that and who it should be, I don't know the answer to that. And that's for Palestinians to figure out, I think.
Sure, we appreciate that. Thank you, Mitchell. I have another question that speaks to the megaphone that Thomas Friedman has throughout the New York Times. And the question states, years ago, he said that the two-state solution, the two-state solution was dead as a doornail. In the past year or two, he has reversed himself and calls for the two-state solution. Is he disingenuous, manipulative, or what? Another example would be Friedman is definitely not pro-Netanyahu, but he thinks the Israeli government could move back towards the center.
Okay, so let me start with that last bit, because I do think that's one thing I do hear, not only from Friedman but from others. People talk about the Israeli politics as a sort of pendulum, that it swings back and forth. It actually doesn't. It's been obviously nothing in politics is directly linear, right? You go in a certain direction, you might take a step back, but then you overall move in that direction. That's part of what Martin Luther King meant when he said that the arc of history is long but bends towards justice. You doesn't always consistently move forward, but his point was that that's the overall trend. The overall trend in Israel since the 1970s has been towards the right. It has stepped back a little bit, but it even when it has, it's been minimal. Israel's been going pretty steadily to the right. So that's not the idea that Israel might, again, the last government was slightly more moderate. Okay, it still had a settler as its head, or head of a guy who made his name with literally endorsing apartheid. So, and referring here to Naftali Bennett, it's not going back towards the center. And if you look at the younger generation of Israelis, you can see this. I mean, the younger, where young people, we often think more idealistic and this and that. In Israel, they are even farther right. So it's not, it's not going back. So that's as far as Friedman. I mean, I don't know. I never met the man. can't say I ever had much of a desire to. He has basically established himself in the Times as the guy who has everything to say about Israel. He used to have, I would say, a great many contacts in both the American and Israeli government that he really was able to drill and get some juicy tidbits out of. In my opinion, based on what I've seen and what I've heard, just kind of scuttlebutty over the past few years, Friedman's more on the outside now and is trying to kind of he sort of moves wherever his mind takes him on that given day, which is why he might seem a little less consistent. I think there's that, and I think also the fact that his sort of two-state-ish liberal Zionism view has really crashed and burned, and I think he doesn't really know where to go from here, because he either abandons Israel completely, which I don't think he wants to do because it would really take away a lot of what he does for a living, or he latches on to the Israeli right, which I think again is too far out of character for him. So he's kind of flailing. That's how I see his sort of inconsistency. I also think that at this point, it's true that Biden, when he wanted to talk about Israel, sat down with Friedman, but for the most part, I don't think Friedman's is much of a bellwether of where things are either in Washington or Jerusalem anymore. I think he's a lot less relevant than he used to be. But listen, I guess he makes a good living, so let him enjoy. But I would recommend not to, there was a time that, like him or dislike him, you needed to take him seriously. I think that time's passed.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start with this longer one here at the bottom to make sure it gets answered. So I have a question that states, given the challenges you correctly identified, I believe BDS is the main action that should be supported and expanded as the anti-apartheid movement against South Africa, referencing that. In parallel with all other action. And once the US supports it, it has a good chance to succeed. It seems to scare Israel more than anything else because it's peaceful. And then ultimately, two people in Palestine and Israel start talking the reality of the conflict to live in one secular democratic state is the best option. And your thoughts on that?
I hope you're right. I'm not sure that that's where things go, and let me explain why. I do agree with you certainly that BDS is the best option right now. As I said earlier, I think it's time that we really focus on trying to find a way to get to the S part, to get to sanctions and figuring that out. I think you put right in there, when the US comes along, I think we need to look at apartheid South Africa and see the US really didn't get on board until the train had pretty much left the station in the 80s. I don't know, I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you remember the actual, but I was in the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s. And it was stunning for a while, for a good long while, how stubborn the Reagan administration was about not joining literally the entire world. By that time, Europe had even, given up and said, yeah, apartheid's got to go. The United States and Israel, by the way, stood by South Africa almost to the end, until the late, really into the late 80s. When they were the last ones to do it, and only did it, I think, because they were so isolated in their support of apartheid. So and that's South Africa. Israel is a different beast in terms of the United States. I think it's not looked at as just another country. It is looked at, first of all, you have a large sector, and not only the Christian Zionist sector, but you have a large sector of people who, just based on their religion, see the Jews as being appropriately in control of the land of Israel, which is Palestine for many centuries. and it has gone through, by the way, a number of names. I think when we think about Palestine, Professor Noor Salah, Palestinian professor, I believe, is in Oxford, or is it somewhere in England? I believe he has an exhaustive book. It's a tough read. It's a very long book and very academic. But Palestine 4,000 history of 4,000 years, I believe it's called. It is invaluable in learning just how diverse the history of Palestine is and how many different people have called Palestine home over the centuries. The problem, and I think we get back to this, is that for many European Christians and certainly for many Jews, the idea of Palestine is a Jewish homeland. That's what the definition of Palestine is, and I think it's very, very hard to get past that. So I think I think the United States has a long way to go before it's going to get on board with anything like BDS or anything that is substantial pressure against Israel. I mean, right now we're just trying to get the United States to stop running cover for every single thing Israel does. So we got a really long way to go. I don't know that I necessarily want to wait until the U.S. government is willing to join the BDS movement. So I think that might be a little bit too far, way too far in the future. I do think, again, I spoke earlier about the shift in the Democratic Party, but let's remember, that shift was 64%. It did not reflect that. And I think this is an important point. It did not reflect any kind of opposition to the idea of Israel as a Jewish state. And I think that's important. And certainly it's 64% of Democrats. So you still have like half of independents and an overwhelming majority of Republicans who do not hold anything like those views, who have no sympathy for the Palestinians. So you still have a strong majority of Americans that are staunchly pro-apartheid. Let's put it that way, not just pro-Israel, but pro-apartheid, because many of those 64% of Democrats, I think, would identify as pro-Israel, but just anti-apartheid pro-Israel. So that they would think of themselves as being against the apartheid regime, but trying to find some way to still support Israel as a Jewish homeland. Which I think, by the way, is not incompatible with the secular one person, one vote state. I think it can still be, if you have a constitution, it could still be a Jewish homeland and a Palestinian homeland. If those things are presented as equal in a constitution, I think that's a way of accommodating the personal nationalistic feelings of both peoples and still allow for true justice and true equality between them. So, I can't quite see the part about the United States getting on board so well, but I think that a single secular democratic state, I'll support. I'll be honest. Again, I'm an American Jew. I will support any solution that Israelis and Palestinians legitimately agree to. In other words, when I say legitimately, I mean, if the Palestinians are basically forced to accept the deal, no, that's not what I'm going to support. If there's a true agreement, if it's something Palestinians legitimately want and something Israelis legitimately want, I absolutely will support it, whatever that form is. I also think, again, as an American Jew, the end game is not for me to decide. I think the international community's job and the proper role for the United States and every other country is to address the power imbalance between Israel and Palestine so that the two sides can actually decide how can we have a future together that allows for justice, allows for addressing some of the wrongs that have gone on, at least to some extent, allows for dealing with the questions of Palestinian refugees, of Jews in the Middle East, all of the different questions that people come up with, that need to be discussed. There should be a way, and it's not hard to envision a way if countries are acting in good faith, a way to broker these talks in a way that Palestinians and Israelis can actually come together and have a real conversation and come to real solutions that work for everyone. That's possible if if other countries are willing to play that constructive a role. And that's exactly why, as another person pointed out, the United States is the biggest problem, because the United States absolutely blocks anything like that from happening. So, again, that's where I think we have to focus in the States, and in Palestine and in Israel, people have to focus on what does the solution look like. I think we need to think a lot less about what the solution looks like and how we stop being part of the problem.
So true. Thank you so much, Mitchell. We've got time for one more here. And the last question we have is asking on Israel's relationship to Iran. And we have, is Israel actually aware that Iran is not nearly as threatening to them as they declare, but likes the position of quote unquote, poor, vulnerable Israel, only democracy in the Middle East. Israel must be protected against big bad Iran. Or is Israel actually afraid of Iran? Just speaking to that, if you can, before we close.
So I think that's actually a really important question. And obviously the answer is speculative, right? I can't say for sure this is about what is in other people's heads. I will say for absolutely certain that Israeli people, regular people on the streets of Tel Aviv, of Jerusalem, of Haifa, are scared of Iran. They are legit scared of Iran. They are scared of the idea, because what do they see? They see, everybody talking about Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and they look at a map and they see the size of Israel, and they say, one, maybe two nukes, and the entire country is gone. I think that does scare them. I think Iran itself often likes to rattle its saber. The point of that is to scare people, and it works. I mean, Israel certainly does it enough itself. So, so that part of it is real. In terms of the government and the people who actually know what Iran's capabilities are, I think they are well aware that Iran is not really capable of attacking Israel. I think they are also well aware that because the intelligence assessments are clear, that certainly as the United States arrived at in 2007, they said, the National Intelligence Estimate in 2007 said that Iran has not been seeking a nuclear weapon since 2003. That has not changed. That has been the assessment ever since. They know that. And they also know that Iran has a decent military. Even if the two countries bordered each other, Israel's military is superior. But Iran's military would be something of a threat if it was close. But Iran would have to cross quite a distance to get to Israel, and Israel, they would be vulnerable. I mean, if they did it through the air, there's just no realistic way for Iran to attack Israel other than through groups like Hezbollah and things of that nature, which do not in any way pose an existential threat. That's clear. I think the Israeli military knows that, the Israeli government knows that, and yes, Iran is a boogeyman. Iran is there to scare people, to scare Israelis, to get a more militant policy, to scare Americans, to also get a more militant policy. It works here too. So it's not just Israel. I mean, take a look at the way Washington talks about Iran. First of all, the constant mantra of them being the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism is a lie. They do sponsor many militant groups throughout the region. The leading state sponsor of groups that we would label terrorist is Saudi Arabia, our ally. So, and that, occasionally we've actually seen that pointed out by members of Congress and others, but very, very rarely. But that's the truth of the matter. So, and is Iran a threat to the United States? No. Is Iran, first of all, is Iran a theocratic dictatorship? Yes. Iran's biggest threat to his own people. We've seen some of the evidence of that over the past couple of years, the protests and the response to them. And Iran does absolutely support Hezbollah. It supports many groups throughout the region that would be considered militant or terrorist, depending on what side you're on. But are they really the kind of threat that is being made out? No. And actually, I think Saudi Arabia kind of showed everyone the way to deal with them, which is talk to them. Again, it's not to say that these are, the Iranian regime is not a nice bunch of folks. They are, they are repressive, they are authoritarian, clearly misogynistic, but that, none of those things stop us from making alliances with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Uganda, with we can list a whole bunch of countries that those things are true of. These are not the issues, and to the extent that they are issues, if we actually wanted to make them better, we would be engaging with them instead of sanctioning them and threatening them and, potentially carrying out attacks against them. So, so back to the question: does Israel know? The Israeli leadership knows what Iran's capabilities are. They know that Iran is unfriendly. They know that Iran is not an existential threat. They know that Iran is not actually pursuing nuclear weapons. They know all of these things. At the same time, Iran does no one any favors when they constantly reiterate that the Zionist regime will disappear and say things they know are going to be, whether they mean it this way or not, they know are going to be taken as threats to destroy Israel. They know are going to be interpreted that way. So, obviously there's some level at which, that perception also works for Iran as well. But yes, all of it is political theater and needs to be dealt with through diplomacy and not the ongoing hostility that has caused so many problems.
Gosh, so true. Thank you so much, Mitchell.
We have so many more questions and we are out of time. I'm just wondering, Mitchell, if we sent you those questions, could you address them?
Absolutely. I can, you can send them to me. You guys have my actually, and people in the audience, if you have questions, you can reach me, Mitchell at rethinkingforeignpolicy.org.
We'll put that in the chat.
Yeah. And feel free. I might take me a while to get back to you, but I pretty much answer everything that comes to me. So
well, that would be fabulous, because I don't want anyone to think that we don't think your questions are worthy enough for the.
Actually, if the questions you asked are anything like the questions people would email me, that's terrific. I'd love to see them, and they will help me get inspired to write other articles. So that's great.
Fabulous. We have a pretty informed audience. I think.
Yeah, I see that.
Notice that.
I see that.
And Mitchell, please stay on the line after we close with the audience.
Sure.
All right. And now I would like to close again. Our thanks to Mitchell. So much to think about, as always. And I want to echo what you said, that yes, action is absolutely necessary, but we are not going to stop delivering our monthly forums because we think they lay the foundation for action.
I agree. So
there we go. All right. A reminder to complete the very short, and it is short, folks, so please complete the evaluation. The link is found in the sidebar in the chat. And as always, the forum recording will be posted on our website. So tell your friends. If anybody missed today's forum, they can still watch it. The October 21st forum, that will be the date for our October forum, will feature Mazem Kimsaya. He has spoken with MEPN before and is always an excellent speaker. He's the director of Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability and Palestine Museum of Natural History, and also professor at Bethlehem University. He's a busy man. He was just in the United States, although not up here in our country. He will speak on diversity as a key to peace and sustainability in Palestine, human, biological, agricultural. We'll also, during the October meeting, hold a very, very short annual meeting. It's required for us to continue with our work. So that will preface Mazem's talk. Watch your email for the formal announcement and how to register for the October forum, as always. And finally, if you are new to MEPN forums and like what you see and hear, please consider becoming a member through a donation of any amount. A link has been posted in the chat for you to give this way via givemn.org, or you may send a check directly to MEPN, and that source is in our website, mepn.org. On behalf of the board, we thank you all for your support, and certainly thank you, Mitchell, for your openness and directness. And I want to emphasize directness. You respond where you feel comfortable to respond, and that's appreciated. And we look forward to seeing all of you at future forums, and perhaps you again as well, Mitchell.
I'd love to come back.
All right. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you.